placed on one item relative to the other by a consumer must be the same for all consumers if they have to ensure exchange efficiency or efficiency in consumption. And we say market in which firms or a market in which individuals or consumers pay the same price often meet this condition where the marginal rate of substitution, which is the last unit, the value placed on the last unit of commodity X relative to commodity Y, is marginal rate of substitution. If they are equal, then we have exchange efficiency, and markets in which they all face the same price means that this equality is easily attained. Then the production efficiency says that given technology, the production of one good cannot be increased without decreasing the production of another, and this is Pareto efficient. And when we talk about production efficiency, we also look at the relative value that a firm places, let's say firm A places on the last unit of labor relative to the last unit of capital. And in this case, we say that that is marginal rate of technical substitution. And to show that there is Pareto efficiency, the marginal rate of technical substitution for all the firms in an industry or in the economy must be the same for labor relative to capital. And markets in which all the firms face the same factor prices. They face the same price for factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur. Then such markets often usually have the marginal rate of technical substitution condition met for production efficiency. Then the product mix efficiency says goods that are produced must correspond with what the consumers desire most. And the firms have to transform the production of one good into another depending on certain trade-off. And we say the rate at which one good can be transformed into another in production is referred to as marginal rate of product transformation. And product mix efficiency is met when the marginal rate of product transformation equals marginal rate of substitution. And the markets in which they face the same price, this is easily attained. And then last time I was trying to show you some inequality here. Assume that the marginal rate of product transformation is 2y is to 1x, whereas the marginal rate of substitution, what the consumers are actually consuming or actually produce and consuming by what the consumers are actually consuming or what the consumers are actually exchanging, is 1y is to 1x. And we say that the marginal rate of product transformation is greater than the marginal rate of substitution here. This relation is greater than this one. Why? Because you can see here that 2y, here is 2y, and this one is 1x. This means that the economy can produce 2 units of y by sacrificing 1 unit of x, whilst the consumers are willing to exchange 1 unit of y for 1 unit of x. This is what this relation means. We say this is greater than this because if you make all of them to be in the same unit, like I've done here, this is 2y is to 1x. This is 1y is to 1x. So we want to try and get 2y here as well. So we multiply this by 2, we multiply this by 2. If you multiply the numerator by 2, the denominator by 2, you don't change anything. But you see that here, it means the consumer, what is actually produced is what the consumers are exchanging. The consumers are exchanging 2y for 2x. but the producers are producing 2y for 1x. The producers are willing to sacrifice 2y for 1x. What it means is that there is an overproduction of x, too much of x, because we need 1x, but here, because the consumers are exchanging 2y, 2x. So they exchange in the market, they give up 2x for 2y, whereas the firms production, the marginal rate of product transformation requires that 2y goes with 1x. So what it means is that instead of 1x, we have 2x here. If here were to be 2y, 1x, and then here too is 2y, 1x, then we say they are equal. But here, this is 2y, 2y, this is 1x, this is 2x. So there is overproduction of x. So obviously the economy produces too much of x relative to the preferences of the consumers, and too little of y relative to the taste of the consumers. So here again, you see that because if you normalize the numerator and the denominator, you'll see 2x is being produced instead of 1x in this case. So it means there's overproduction of x by overproduction of x. You can do the reverse. Instead of multiplying here by 2y, 2y by 2, so that this and this are the same, you can divide here by half. So if I divide 2 by 2, divide 2 by 2, divide 2 by 2, you get 1y. Divide 1x by 2, you get half x. Here again, if you compare it with the original 1y, 1x, you see that the producers here are producing such that they are trading off 1y for half x. But here, 1y is to 1x, which means there is overproduction of x as far as this is concerned. What needed is what the consumer need to be exchanging. If we need equality here, should be half x, 1y to half x. But here, they are exchanging 1y to 1x. So again, there is overproduction of x here, as we said earlier. Why? Because we need half and they are producing 1. 1 is greater than half, so there is overproduction of x there again. So this is the point where we say there cannot be Pareto efficiency if we have this condition, because the marginal rate of product transformation is not equal to the marginal rate of substitution. There is overproduction of x relative to y. Don't confuse yourself. Here is s, here is x. But because 2y is here, if you normalize it, you see there's overproduction of x. Or if you normalize it the other way, you see we need half x, but we are exchanging 1x here, which means there's overproduction of x. Good. This is some summary notes that I saw in the Stiglitz from page 63. I told you to read the textbook or the summary notes. I'm not sure. I don't know whether you are doing that or you are not doing that. But this is some nice summary notes I got from there. I will entreat you to go and read it. It's just a paragraph on page 63 of Stiglitz. The textbook that I sent you, one of them, page 63 of the Stiglitz, you have this paragraph that explains the whole of this well for you, more or less in a layman language. What is exchange efficiency? What is production efficiency, product efficiency, and then all that. So we look at summary notes here. And my summary note is still making reference to page 63 of Stiglitz. So you must try and read that paragraph there. We said resource allocations where no one can be made better off without making somebody else worse off. are referred to as efficient, Pareto efficient allocation. If the market is efficient, then we expect that the three conditions, exchange efficiency, production efficiency, and then the product mix efficiency must apply to the market or must be satisfied. And so we say if a market is competitive, then that market has Pareto efficiency. Why? Because in a competitive market, all the market players face the same price. If they face the same price, then it means they are placing the same value on all the goods and services that are being traded in the market. So in that case, you see exchange efficiency is met because the value placed on the last unit of commodity X, for instance, will be the same as the value placed on the last unit of commodity Y for individuals A, B, C, D in the economy if they face the same price. Then for production efficiency, we say the marginal rate of technical substitution should be the same for all the firms in the market. And if they face the same factor prices, because they are paying the same prices for factors of production, that conditions to is met. Each of them is placing the same value on any two inputs, let's say labor relative to capital. So that one to satisfy that condition. So we explain the other fundamental theorems of welfare analysis which root this competitive market issue, and we learn that redistribution of initial factor endowment can enable us to get the second best solution. The first best solution is says that if the economy is competitive and satisfy perfect competition assumptions or conditions, then the economy is Pareto efficient. So leave everything to the economy to allocate resources efficiently. Second best is that there are instances in which you have to redistribute the initial wealth endowment or initial factor endowment and leave the rest of the market. This is called the second best solution. So we have exchange efficiency, we have production efficiency, saying the same thing in different ways or in some repetitive manner. So you can just read that for yourself as a summary. I was trying to now put some practice questions together for you, but I couldn't have time to continue. One of them says, why do competitive markets have Pareto efficiency? It's because they face the same price. And the subtle way of the same question is to ask, why are markets in which participants face the same price Pareto efficient? These markets are Pareto efficient because it means each market participant places the same value on the goods that are traded or the factors of production that are employed. So Pareto efficiency. Now, for today, our focus is going to be on market failure. So we'll discuss market failure. And from what I've just explained in the few minutes ago, you see that under certain circumstances or conditions, competitive market results in Pareto efficient allocation. And these conditions include the fact that there should be many buyers and sellers in the market, whereby no single seller or buyer can influence price. There should be perfect information such that the information available to sellers is the same as information available to buyers. There should be free entry and exit into the market such that firms that are producing at a very high cost will be forced to exit the market, and firms that are producing at a low cost or those that have technologies that produce at a low cost enter the market to ensure that they drive price downwards and then accrue a lot of consumer surpluses. But we also know that these conditions that I have just rattled oftentimes fail. There are conditions that are not fulfilled in reality. In practice, some of these conditions are not fulfilled. And if they are not fulfilled, in those respects, the market tend to overproduce, especially where air pollutants and water pollutants or negative externalities are concerned. And then the market rather underproduce when positive externalities are concerned, or they lead people to live on little income inequality problems result. Let me explain this at once so that when we meet it elsewhere, I can just go gloss over it. And this the slides I'm projecting now, as I told you always, I said try and read the summary of the chapter that I've cited on the course outline before you come for lectures. If you have read that, you see that it's the same as what I have here. And once you go through this, you see that it gives you a whole understanding of the topic of market failure before even we get to the nitty-gritties of it. So this is what I want you to be doing, if you want to. If you don't want to do it, okay, it's over to you. It's your own cup of tea. Market overproduce when we have negative externalities. For instance, like the situation on the soft drink that production that I was talking about. If the firm knows that they are not going to be factoring the cost of disposal of water pollutants or air pollutants or all those pollutants into the gutters, which cause the health hazards for some people who live in those areas where the wastewater eventually gathers or eventually passes through the gutters. This will mean that they can just continue to produce the soft drinks and overproduce it without being mindful of the pollutants. So what will happen is the more they produce, they continue to produce, the more pollutants they also release into the gutters, and this can cause a lot of health hazards. But if they were to factor the cost of the disposal of the waste or the pollutants into the drain, into their production functioning, what will happen is that they will produce less and less of the soft drink, because now the external cost now becomes another barrier or another constraint to production, and therefore they'll be mindful of that and produce less and less of, or produce social optimal levels of the soft drink. Social optimal level here means that the production level that caters for the consumers of the soft drink, but also caters for the people who are suffering from the pollutants that are disposed into gutters as a result of the production of the soft drinks by the company. There are instances where the market underproduce. The market underproduce in instances where, for instance, we have positive externalities. When you talk about immunization, for instance, is a positive externality, because when I get immunized, I reduce the risk of transferring the disease to somebody else. So that person else should be compensating me for sacrificing to go through the process of immunization so that he or she will be better off. So, but you see that if I know that person who accrue extra benefit or external benefits from me getting immunized is not going to compensate me, there will be less incentive for me to increasingly go through the pain of getting immunized. And therefore, in this case, you see that the market underproduce. And I've also told you that even when the market is efficient and does efficient allocation of resources, it does so with a lot of inequalities, as we studied under the utilitarian social welfare function. A lot of those inequalities. And therefore, those inequalities can worsen development gap in a country. And for these reasons, it will be necessary for some level of government intervention. And we also make a case that even if the market doesn't fail at all, government intervention might be necessary to define and enforce property rights, and enforce contracts so that the market can work better. Oftentimes, you see that if the market does not have these fundamentals where property rights are defined and contracts are enforced, you see more often than not that the market will not function well. For instance, places where land is said to be commonly owned, you see that people can overgraze the land and they can send cows to go and eat grasses on the land and overgraze it and blah, blah, blah. Why? Because they know no one has the property right over it. But immediately it is a property right is defined and enforced, you see that grazing there, you have to pay for the grazing there. And because you have to pay something for it, you will not be in the position to overgraze, because overgrazing means you have to pay more. And the barrier of not paying more becomes a restricting factor for the market to work well then. So also is the case that sometimes property rights are not well defined, especially in common housing situations where a lot of people live in sometimes government housing area, and they believe that the property is not theirs, they are just and because they believe they don't have property right over the place, they don't take good care, or they are not willing to take steps to make sure that the property is protected more often than not. But if property rights are assigned and enforced through pricing and reflection in price levels, you see that the problem of poor sanitation or poor maintenance of common housing could be resolved much more easily. For instance, if I know I am the one who has property rights over a particular apartment, anybody who does anything to cause a sanitation problem there, I'll enforce my property right and say you have to clean it up or compensate me to make sure that I get somebody to clean it up. And that compensation requires that you make some payments. In loan contracts or loan agreements also, there is need to be enforced. Otherwise, resources that are put into such ventures by the market will not be recouped. So you see that again, loan contracts and enforcement of contracts will be necessary for the market to work. And similarly, if contracts are not enforced by the government, there can be a situation where people can run away with others' investment. And because they know, okay, after all, nothing will happen to me, I'm not under any obligation, blah, blah, blah. And in this case, you see that you can have the market failing. So in these instances, even if the market is Pareto efficient, there is need for government intervention to define and enforce property rights and contracts. And this is the kind of school of thought that we studied about last time, which is the Chicago School of Thought on Public Finance, which says that government intervention will be necessary to improve market efficiency. So here, if the market is even Pareto efficient, these fundamental reasons will require government intervention, but the intervention will only be sometimes minimal. Now, however, as we have studied, the conditions that also say the market is Pareto efficient often break down, and they can break down in 6 respects where the market mechanism may not be able to produce Pareto efficient resource allocation. The first one is when we have failure in competition or imperfect competition. The second one is the situation of public goods. The third one is externalities. The fourth one is incomplete markets. The fifth one is information asymmetry of failures. And then the sixth one is unemployment. We'll discuss some of them, not all of them, especially we'll not talk about the unemployment one because you need to know something about risk analysis to be able to appreciate that. So in this respect, we say the market has failed. So, and even the market is Pareto efficient. There are two further fundamental reasons why government intervention might be necessary. First, competitive markets may give rise to socially undesirable distribution of income. Like I told you, whenever the competitive market allocates resources, it allocates resources on the basis of factor endowments, and those entities that are able to have rights or command rights over the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneur are able to earn the benefits or compensation from the firms. And this compensation from the firms is what makes the allocation efficient. So you see that more and more when the market is efficient and does allocation, the rich are the people who get access to the rewards of the market. Why? Because they have the factor endowments, non-labor capital, and etc. So there will be some need for income redistribution to make sure that the rich do not necessarily get richer while the poor gets poorer. And so government intervention might be necessary, sometimes through taxes and through subsidies, where the people who command rights over the factors of production and therefore earn the rewards that are associated with market allocation of resources are made to pay a little bit more tax so that it will provide revenue that will be used to make subsidies available to the poorest of the poor. And reducing income gap or income inequality has public good characteristics because, you know, when the poor people also are able to make ends meet, it is then that they don't get into gangs and take guns and go out and go and be attacking the rich in the night as some robbers or thieves or blah, 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 burglary and etc. So at the end of the day, you see that bridging the gap between the poor has both positive externalities and public good characteristics. So it becomes a case or a justification for government intervention. Then also we say the second point is that sometimes individual may not be able to, may not make good judgments of what is in their best interest. And therefore, there will be need for government intervention to set what is in their best interest for them. You know, governments may have the capacity to be able to analyze to show that this is in your best interest rather than something that you yourself are thinking about. So the second reason why we think it's possible for government intervention, even the market does not fail, we don't produce Pareto efficient. We produce Pareto efficient outcome is when government intervenes to make people to consume merit goods or to make people to set their priorities right. For instance, in the European countries, many of the European countries, you see that the level of education and appreciation is very high, but you see a lot of people smoking, even professors, some are chain smokers and all that. Is the smoking in their self-interest? Yes. But is it a good judgment to be smoking? No. Why? Because it poses a lot of health risks to you and you can have challenges with your health when you keep smoking. So you see that it is a way of intervening. So government can intervene in such situations with maybe prohibitive taxes on cigarettes so that people who consume cigarette will bear the tax, and because of the tax, they will consume less and less of such cigarettes. So some of these reasons provide justification for government intervention. Then we say point 5, though the presence of the market failure implies that there may be scope for government activity, it does not imply that a particular government program aimed at correcting the market failures will necessarily be desirable because of government failures. And therefore, sometimes we have to evaluate government programs to make sure that they are in line with such objectives. So one of the ways to evaluate this program is to carry out what we call cost-benefit analysis, where before government intervenes in the market or intervenes, we look at the benefits, the discounted benefits that will accrue over a period of time, say 20 years, versus the discounted cost of government intervention over a period, say 20 years. Then we look at the net present value of the benefits versus the net present value of the cost. If the net present value of the benefits exceeds the net present value of the cost, then we say there is a justification for government to intervene and provide such programs. So we do this cost-benefit analysis sometimes as a value for money justification for government intervention, mindful of the fact that government intervention can be undesirable in certain respects. Point 6, like I told you when we talk about the tools of public finance analysis, we said there's the normative aspect where we ask what can government do about failures and etc. Normative approach looks at the role of government and sometimes even the biases that we have dependent on our mode of understanding issues and etc. And then we also have the positive analysis or positive approach, which looks at the objective side of things. For instance, if government does X or implement X project, what to be the effects on Y people, or what to be the effects in general, and how does the nature of the political process influence this government intervention and all that. These are not subjective analysis, they are positive analysis because they tell us what the effect would be factual, what the effect would be as a fact, instead of looking at the normative side that usually looks at some subjective view as regards what the role of government can be in this situation. Good, so that's by way of the introduction, drawing from the summary notes that are provided in this chapter 4, the end of chapter 4 of Stiglitz, page 63 or so. Is it 63? It's on page 63 or so, on some page. So try and then go and read it, please, so that you can apprise yourself more. But formally introducing what we mean by market failures follows the proposition of Adam Smith that in competitive economies, an individual pursuing his private gains will eventually be promoting the common public good situation. So it becomes beneficial to the public or to the society as a whole if the person or an individual pursues his or her private gains. So far we've studied all about the competitive market situation, and we say the market mechanism will lead to efficient or Pareto optimal allocation of resources if the market itself is competitive. And we lay some conditions under which this can be possible. But the conditions for Pareto optimality also requires that we specify the technology and also review preferences in addition to the perfect competitive market. And these assumptions or these conditions often fail in the real world. And therefore, you don't have them existing in the real world. So Pareto efficiency might not result in the market more often than not. So we have certain respects. For instance, in a single market, we are going to demonstrate that even when we are going to demonstrate that there are circumstances under which the market will produce nothing. For instance, in the case of public goods, and the answer is the market will produce nothing if people are not willing to pay for it, or they are not willing to review their true preference for it, because they know if they review their true preference, they will be made to pay in line with the true preferences. So in such cases where we have public goods, you can have the market failing. We also have market producing inefficient results, like the market to overproduce or underproduce what is socially optimal, especially in the case of externalities, where we have positive externalities, then the market underproduce. Where we have negative externalities, the market overproduce. So we're going to do analysis as regards public goods and then externalities. We proceed to look at the broad rationale for market failures. Market fail usually when we have imperfect competition, and imperfect competitive markets are all there, or structures are all there. We have what we call monopoly or monopoly power. We have monopolistic, and we have cartels and blah, 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 blah. I will discuss that later also in one of the slides. Producers and consumers may impose a cost or confer a benefit to other producers or consumers without paying for the cost or charging a benefit for it. If this happens, then we say there are production or consumption externalities. When consumers impose a cost without paying for a cost, then we say we have negative externalities. Usually the negative is when there's a cost, the positive are associated with the benefits. The next bullet point says the process by which the process produces a public good for which it is impossible and undesirable to levy a charge. So if you can't levy a charge or can't force people to pay for a good that is going to be provided or produced, then that good will be a situation of public goods. Incomplete markets also can extend far into the future and do not cover all risk as well. Incomplete market situations are also another rationale for market failure broadly. And this happens when sometimes you see that the payment that when the marginal cost of producing the item is even lower than what the people are willing to pay for the item, but the market will not produce that. For instance, is the case of health insurance. At the point where premiums are being decided, people pretend and say they are not coming they will not come to the hospital and all blah, 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 blah. Once they say those characteristics and they use it to price premiums for them, they later on frequent the hospital and then go for visits and overconsume relative to what they have paid as premium. The reason why they can do that is because the market is incomplete. The market at the point where they are setting the premium, the people are considering, okay, with this premium, it means what they are paying is more than the cost of producing what they want to enjoy. So let's pick them up. But in the future, when they start to visit the hospital frequently, then you see that those other characteristics are now coming to bear on their consumption, and this can lead to problems. So oftentimes, sometimes if insurance people want to even enter there, they will charge a very high premium. And if they charge a very high premium too, sometimes they are afraid that, okay, it means that people will not take the insurance policy or the health insurance. And if they charge a low too, they will think, oh, the people take the, but will be at the losing side, because it means that if they consume in the future, then we are going to lose, because it means we will not be able to make ends meet, will not cover the cost of their hospital visitation based on the premium they have paid. So if you look at this situation, you see that the market will fail because the market is incomplete. It doesn't factor in all those hidden facts that were in there. Then information is incomplete and imperfect, where we have information asymmetry. Instances of moral hazard and adverse selection are also issues that can make the market fail. We'll discuss that in depth when we come to information asymmetry as a reason for market failures. Now let's talk about failure of competition, the first point that we want to consider. For Pareto efficiency, as we have studied, we said that there must always be perfect competitive market conditions or perfect competitive economy to achieve Pareto efficiency. But we know in actual world, there are bound market structures or firm structures that are not perfectly competitive. For instance, we have monopolies. Monopoly where one seller sells to many buyers. But this conflicts with the perfect competitive market, because for perfect competitive economy, we say there must be many buyers and many sellers, so that no single seller can influence price. But here we have just one seller selling to many buyers. So this is clearly a violation of the many buyers, many sellers condition for a perfect competitive market. Then also we have an oligopoly, where few firms are selling to several buyers. Example is the situation we have in the telephony in Ghana, where we have MTN, Tigo, and Airtel, I think few selling and grow. I don't know whether they are still there, selling to 30 million or 25 million plus population. And what happens is that if we have such a situation, there is a tendency that they can influence prices easily without the recourse to the market. Whereas the market is competitive and produce Pareto efficient outcomes when the people face the same price, and there are many sellers, many buyers. But if you have few sellers selling to many buyers, they can influence price. Then a variant of that is also what we call monopolistic competition, where several firms are selling or are producing, but in this case, they produce slightly differentiated goods and charge such differentiated prices for it. So, for instance, you have banks. The banks are mainly monopolistic competitive firms. There are many banks that produce, but aside being many, they have differentiated their products some way, somehow. That is how come some individuals are loyal to particular brands or banks relative to the others, because of the slightly differentiated service or products that they offer. So in that case, if they can slightly differentiate, they can charge different prices. But as you know, for a perfect competitive market to produce Pareto outcome, the price in the market must be the same. The sellers and buyers must be price takers. So the price fixed in the market is what they go by. But in this instance, because the firms are producing slightly differentiated products, they can easily charge different prices and still maintain their customers without their customers being driven out or swapped by other firms. Then we have natural monopolies, a situation where it is cheaper for a single firm to produce the entire output rather than several firms producing part of it. This is what we call natural monopolies. It happens usually in the airline industry because of the huge initial capital required and the need to also enjoy the economies of scale that comes with product innovation and some of those cost structures. You see that they oftentimes relegate this to governments and etc. to be in charge. Railway sector too is another example. So in that case, we have natural monopoly. In Ghana, our natural monopoly happens usually in the water production sector, where Ghana Water Company is the one that produces for all of us. And the reason they are producing, because to be able to produce water, the initial cost of entering into the market is very huge. The same applies to provision of electricity or energy. The initial cost is very huge. So oftentimes it is necessary that government intervene, because in those respects the market will fail. The other example is imperfect information. Imperfect information can also make some firms raise up their prices, but they will not lose all their customers. The perfect competitive market requires that if you are in that market, because you are a price taker, once you increase your price by 1 unit, all the consumers will move away from you and buy from others, and you collapse and exit the market. But situations where firms are able to raise their prices without losing their customers is what we refer to as imperfect information, or the effect of imperfect information on the market outcome. An example is what we have seen recently, where we have been told that MTN was enforced by the communication minister and co for them to raise their prices so that there will be competition. And this sometimes we don't know, but it's not in line with economic theory. Economic theory says that when you want to increase competition, you don't ask people to increase prices. You let those that are selling at the high price be forced to reduce their price level. But the reverse is what we have experienced as far as the Ghana economy is concerned, and the astute economist who is leading the economy management team of the country. Anyway, let's proceed. The other thing too is that firms can also engage in strategic behavior or cartels. You have heard about OPEC, the oil producing countries. Sometimes they reduce output, they reduce output to increase prices, or they increase output to reduce prices. So they form a cartel and they engage in collusive or anti-competitive behavior. So they are not able to make the market achieve efficiency. So in those situations, the firms will have the market to fail. So they are engaging in strategic behavior, they are colluding, they are cooperating with their firm. 2, 3, 4, 5 firms lock themselves up somewhere and then decide to cut output so that they can influence price and all that. That is what we call strategic behavior or formation of cartels. This can also reduce market efficiency. Then the last but not the least is patents. Patents are sometimes given by governments for people to innovate and have some right over their innovation for a number of years. Then after that, they can open it up to the market. These patents often reduce the competition that is necessary for the market to efficiently allocate resources. So these are some of the situations in which we have imperfect competition, and firms are able to influence prices if you have this kind of income. Imperfect competition. Then also remember we say the first best theorem. The first best theorem requires that we have perfect competition so that no influence on price can come from a single unit in the market in order to produce Pareto efficiency. But if you are unable to get that perfect competition, then we can only fall on the second best solution, which says that we can redistribute wealth in order to make the market much more efficient. Therefore, market may fail under such circumstances because for competitive market to work, you see that the market condition requires competition and etc. And in the end, for you to be able to produce in such market, you must be equating your marginal revenue to marginal cost to price. But in a monopoly, what happens is that they equate marginal revenue to marginal cost, which is usually less than price, or reverse the condition. Those of you who have done a bit of mathematics, you recall that when you have a less than and you change the position of the right-hand side value and you send it to the right-hand side variable, we send to the left-hand side, the sign changes. So what you see here, if we reverse this, is that price will be greater than marginal cost equals marginal revenue. What this means is that the monopoly will be able to charge a higher price than the marginal cost. And this means anytime you charge a higher price, what happens to consumer surplus? Consumer surplus reduces. So you see that in this case, the monopoly is going to influence the price. It's going to cause the consumer surplus to reduce. So in this case, the market will not be efficient in that respect. All right, this makes the competition imperfect and therefore a market to fail. So the first reason why market to fail is due to imperfect competition. The second is incomplete markets. Incomplete markets are markets in which you largely see that the amount potential buyers are willing to pay is much more than the cost of producing a good, but the market fails to produce that. This is because they believe in the future there are extra costs that will only be revealed in the future. For instance, if the cost of producing, the cost of providing a service or a good is 40 Ghana and individuals are willing to pay, let's say 50 Ghana, but the market refuses to produce that. Clearly, if you see this scenario, you say, okay, there will be profit in that. Why are private firms are unable to produce that, despite the fact that we have profit in such markets that they can earn? This is because they believe certain risks will be underestimated or they are hidden, and therefore in future these risks will pop up, and then in the long run it will make them to lose. And hence, based on that, even while the cost is lower than today, than what the individuals are willing to pay, in future they believe the cost will be higher, much higher than what they are paid today, and therefore they cannot be able to cover the cost. Example is the health insurance issue that I was telling you. At the point where people are going to agree on a premium, oftentimes they will tell you that they don't go to the hospital. Oh, yeah, just for the emergency of it. That's why I'm even taking this premium and I'm taking this health insurance. But immediately you agree that they don't fall sick, they don't often go to a hospital, and therefore let me give you this lowest premium. They pay the premium. The next time they are coming to the hospital several times, so they overconsume compared to the amount they have paid as premium, and therefore, if you see you are a private entrepreneur, you see such market opportunities, you will not go there. Although what they are willing to pay today is higher than the cost of providing the service. So the amount they are willing to pay today is let's say it's 200, but the cost of provision of hospital service is 70 Ghana. So you say, oh, okay, there is a profit there. But in the future, you see that when they begin to visit the hospital, frequent the hospital, at the end of the day, you see a lot of visits will lead to rising costs, and the firm will not be able to make profit or not be able to break even, or will be making losses in those circumstances. And therefore, private entrepreneurs will not be interested in entering into that market. That is why if you go to advanced economies like UK and co, more often than not, you see UK, for instance, they have the National Health Service, and all these are spearheaded by the government, because the private sector shies away from some of those provisions because of these characteristics that are embedded. And when they venture into such markets as a private sector, they also often charge very high premiums. And these very high premiums will deter potential people from coming in there. And sometimes too, because of information problems, this can lead to adverse selection. If you continue to charge high premium, you see that at the end of the day, all the people who are willing to take the health insurance become high premium individuals. And this is what we call adverse selection, because high premium means that they are high risk people. They are people who are coming with very high hospital or clinic visitation potentials. And this means you can have adverse selection, where the market adversely select bad risk clients instead of the low risk ones.
Which I don't understand.
So I've given you some examples already. Read other examples from the textbooks I've recommended to you. Then let's come to information asymmetry. Information asymmetry is a situation where there are different sets of information available to market participants. Oftentimes, the information available to the buyer is different from the information available to the seller. And whenever we mention information asymmetry, two things come into mind. One is the moral hazard. The other one is adverse selection. And moral hazard is a situation where information about actions is hidden from one party when they are entering into a transaction or an agreement. And this information only becomes apparent after a deal or agreement is reached. And hence, in the end, you see that this will cause the market to fail. So, for instance, health insurance. And health insurance, when you are going in there, like I cited example already, I discussed it here. You pay premiums that you argue out that you are not a high risk visitor, hospital visitor, you don't have chronic ailments and all that. But immediately you pay the premium, and you know now you can visit the hospital, you overconsume. So this hidden information, if it had been revealed at the point where the transaction or agreement is being made, that would have made the person to charge you a higher premium. But you hid that from the provider, and therefore at the end of the day, this will go. And the more we are aware of this, the less the market or the private market is willing to venture into those areas because of the significant market failure potentials. The other one is the market for sale of used cars. If somebody has used his car for 5 years, 6 years, and he's putting on sale, and you express interest, oftentimes the question, is there any problem with the car, blah, blah, blah. There are hidden problems that the person will never tell you. This car took very good care of it, blah, blah. Sometimes they will even deceive you. It's just that I want to buy a new one and top up and buy a new one and blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, he knows that there's a hidden problem somewhere and etc. If he has revealed that hidden problem to you and say, it has this hidden problem and blah, blah, it means you would have reduced the price. That would have reflected in the price you are willing to pay for that used car. But once that is not available, you see that you are likely to suffer moral hazard situation. I remember very well. There was one time I was living in some rented apartment somewhere, and the place is not good at all. But we're managing. Initially, when you see the house from outside, you look at, you see everything looks perfect. You go inside, everything looks perfect, but the place was difficult to live in and etc. So while we were trying to give it out to somebody else, the person came into my house and, oh, is there any problem? I hope it's not a relocation. I insisted, no, I just want to live here and then because I will be traveling very soon. Essentially, I was going to travel too. So I used that as a reason to just exit the place and the apartment. So this is a kind of what moral hazard, and I learned that the person also didn't stay there for even up to 2 years. The advance he has given because the house has challenges there, and you too want to get out of that trap. So sometimes you have to hide some information, and this is a clear situation of moral hazard that can happen in the market as well. And loan contracts, this moral hazard situation also happens there. When somebody knows that I have a very high risk of default and comes for loan, sometimes they'll tell, oh, me, I'll be able to pay. I've taken this loan before, I've paid it, blah, blah, blah. All these they tell you are just to convince you that they are low risk borrowers and therefore charge a lower interest. Immediately you charge a lower interest and they go back, they will not come and pay even and all that. So it becomes a bad debt on your books and etc. And oftentimes, because of this, sometimes when people who come for loans, those who promise to pay or agree to pay higher interest rates are the people you give out your loans to. So you see that in the end, there comes in what we call adverse selection. The market tends to select only those with high risk and give out loans to. So this is how information differences can lead to market failure as far as the issues of moral hazard and adverse selection is concerned. And usually when adverse selection comes in, there may be some level of misallocation of resources, misallocation to the extent that those who pay the premium for instance, health insurance, are going to consume low premium for health insurance are the people who are essentially going to consume more at the end of the day. And those who pay high premium or pay the premium, some of them will not even visit the hospital at all. For instance, in Ghana, health insurance, people who usually go and renew their health insurance frequently are people who visit the hospital often. Those of us who pay through the mandatory deduction from our Senate contribution do not even visit the hospital and all that. So in the end, you see that we are paying, but we are not enjoying that. So that is this allocation of resources. If there's sufficient allocation, then it means whatever you pay for, that value must accrue to you. That is essentially what we mean by the marginal rate of substitution being the same for all consumers. So you see, in this case, here again, there is that failure. So at the end of the day, the people who pay less often tend to overconsume, and the people who pay more often tend to underconsume. This is what we refer to as a misallocation when we have these instances of information asymmetry, adverse selection, and moral hazards. Good. So I've cited enough examples and blah, blah, blah. You can read the rest from the slides when I send it to you later. I'm unable to send you this slide ahead of time because I was doing a review of it again. So I couldn't even finish reviewing it. So I'll have to do that until I get to the end, then I can send it to you later. The next point where markets can fail is the situation of increasing returns to scale. There are certain markets in which it requires very huge initial capital to be able to start. So these markets naturally becomes markets in which small firms are pushed away automatically. They cannot enter such markets and increase competition in such markets due to the high risk associated with failure, because if you are a small firm and you venture into such markets, it will take a long time before you'll be able to recoup your capital, because you are putting in a lot at the point of entry. And sometimes the uncertainty about whether you'll be able to make it or not make it will make, and the long time it will take for you to even break even, because the initial cost you sunk in is so high that it will take a number of years before you can raise enough revenue to break even. And this uncertainty and etc. will make the competition in such industry or in such production to be very, very, very limited. But you know that in such markets, you know that market efficiency requires that firms exhibit technology that is constant return to scale or decreasing return to scale, right? When we have this increasing return to scale technology, it makes it difficult for entry of smaller firms. Therefore, smaller firms and firms, some firms even in general, are precluded from participating in the market to improve efficiency. So there can be monopoly powers and market powers to be able to influence the prices in those markets. Example is the airline industry. For a very long time, it was Boeing that was manufacturing aircraft, and Boeing had the monopoly for some time until the European Union countries decided to say, okay, we want to try and then break the monopoly in that market, and they established through pooling resources to establish the Airbus company. So the Airbus is now providing some kind of competition to Boeing in the area of aircraft manufacturing. And the same also applies to railways. Railways also require very huge initial capital to be able to start up. That is why Ghana's railway have not been able to develop. And any private entrepreneur that want to go into such a market, they oftentimes require that they are giving sometimes the sole right to operate after they have laid the lines and some of those things. And because of the huge initial capital, oftentimes railway services are provided by governments. Even in Europe, the government own the rails, and then it is only when they want to deregulate that sometimes they allow private firms to also come in with their trains and etc. But largely, train services are owned by governments in Europe because of the large initial capital outlay that it requires. Then utilities, Ghana Water Company, blah, 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 etc. All require huge amounts of money to enter there, and therefore this makes it difficult for private entities to say they are venturing into such markets. And the same applies to provision of energy. For some time, it used to be VRA that provides electricity to the whole country and blah, 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 until we had that doomsday crisis that we now link to the private sector to come in, and you have now some IPPs, independent power producers, producing and supplying to the government and the country now. And even for them to be able to enter, they had to go into some consortium kind of financing, and they have to syndicate some funds here and there to be able to do that. I know of the Asogre power plant, which is Sono Asogre power plant, which is a consortium of Ghanaian entrepreneur and then some Chinese who have put that together, and it was very, very expensive. And therefore, usually when they are into such provisions, they often charge what we call capacity charges. And capacity charges are charges that are imposed on a person who agrees to such provision of electricity and etc., even if the machines are not being used, because it takes a huge sum of money to be able to enter into such market. So there is need to provide some insurance that you can eventually amortize the funds that you have borrowed to pay those debts or to pay to establish the energy plant. So government intervention to break the monopoly will be necessary in this respect. Sometimes government comes in to take over the production of that item because of the huge initial capital involved. And when government takes over, we refer to those ones as natural monopolies. We also make a case that, yes, Pareto efficiency may prevail in the market, but government intervention is needed further because one, income distribution, and as we studied before, the market being efficient oftentimes distributes income according to factor endowments. And so those that are able to command this factor endowment, those that have property rights over this factor endowment are in a position to be better off in the market. And oftentimes when the market is even efficient, this will lead to instances of huge gap between the rich and the poor, inequality situation, equality gap become widened, and all that. And it is the view of economists that sometimes in these situations, government intervention will be very necessary to reduce the income inequality, and government can come in with taxes, taxing those who command those factors of production, and therefore are earning the rewards for them a little bit higher, and then use the money to provide subsidies to firms that to the poor, so that they can also come up a little bit. I told you already that bridging the gap, inequality gap between the rich and the poor has public good and externality, positive externality characteristics, and therefore governments are interested in that, especially to make sure that they bridge the development gap. Then number two, individuals may not act in their own best interest. There is a belief that individuals may not act in their own best interest because some of them may not be fully informed, and those who are fully informed too, some of them may not be able to process. They may have challenges in processing information to know what is in their best interest, and that is what we call bounded rationality. Bounded rationality is a situation where people who have the requisite information, but they are unable to process it to determine what is in their best interest. We call it bounded rationality. And because of that, they make wrong decisions as far as issues are concerned. And therefore, when the government sees such apparent bad decisions or decisions that individuals take that are not in their best interest, we say there is the need for government intervention. For instance, is the smoking. Smoking is bad to your health, to your everything, but people still smoke and blah, blah. Even the educated in Europe still smoke. Ghana, we were just lucky that there was some time that Professor Bedu Akosa, also one of the professors, the astute professors, was able to drum home to some extent passage of tobacco bill and etc. And that has drastically reduced people smoking in open air in Ghana. Yeah, I think it's an offense to smoke in open air and blah, 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 public places and all that. So it's better in Ghana, but if you go to Europe, when I was in Milan, it wasn't easy. Whenever you go and stand by the train station waiting for the train, and you see people, young, old, aged, they are all inside. Some of them, especially the aged, now they are unable to light it. So now they have the electronic one. They will just put it inside and they will be making it poo like that. Sometimes when you stand there, you feel like, but you have no choice, because if you leave there, the train will come and then you will not get a chance to go to wherever you are going to have your classes and etc. So you see, it is not always the case that people are able to take decisions that are in their best interest. So government intervention will be necessary. For instance, those smoking stuff, there is need for government to come in and sometimes impose prohibitive taxes on cigarettes so that people will know, okay, the tax rate is too high and they'll smoke less and less of that. And sometimes you also know that smoking has an effect on public health bill or public health budget, and therefore it becomes a justification for governments to intervene in such respect. And then the use of seat belts. You know, seat belts are good because they reduce the likelihood of problems when you have accident, or even sometimes help you to prevent the accident and etc. But it's not everybody that sees the wearing of seatbelt as in their own best interest. So some people don't wear, some people, unless they see the police, then they start. So you see, such things means that people do not necessarily take the best decision, or they don't make good judgments, and that results in best interest for them. So in this case, it means government intervention. So you see in our country, for instance, in the traffic rules, it is mandatory for you to put your seat belt. And if you are not wearing your seat belt while driving, you can be arrested and put before the court, and all those traffic rules, some of them will apply to you, and etc. So in that case, you see that government intervention is necessary. And when government intervenes, sometimes government can compel such people to consume certain goods, and goods that the government can compel you to consume are called merit goods. For instance, we talk about seat belts, basic education. What else can we talk about? Seat belt, basic education. Sometimes immunization and vaccination. Immunization and vaccination are all part of it, because when one gets immunized, it is more or less a public good. It is more or less in the interest of the person, and therefore sometimes government force people to be immunized. Child vaccination and all those things become compulsory sometimes because they are merit goods. When there is this view that government should intervene because it knows what is in the best interest of individuals, and it's called paternalism. It's in your textbook that I recommended to you, and so you can read around it to know what that means more and more, and examples that are cited. So paternalism is saying that, okay, government knows better what is in the interest of individuals, and therefore government intervention is justified. The other view is that which says that government should not interfere in the choices of people or individuals. It's called libertarianism. And because of this, following libertarianism in the United States of America, in some of those advanced worlds, that has resulted in this prevalence of LGBT plus, etc. kind of choices, where people can go through medical procedures and turn themselves into horses and etc. People are changing their, and now they have been buoyed by a human rights activist who come in and says their human rights, this gender is a social construct, and therefore blah, 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 blah. So now even when you are going to publish academic articles, you are told not to refer to gender in that academic articles unless you are able to cater for almost all the genders. When you go for defense, or editors are looking at those papers, sometimes they ask you, what about these other genders? Because gender is a social construct. So for me, if I'm writing a paper now and a sense of gender comes in, I don't use gender again, I use sex. Sex can only be male or female. It's biological construct. It is gender that they say is social construct and can be anything. So that's some of the things that you see this kind of analysis dovetailing into, as far as the public choice and individual choices are concerned. Good. Let me pause here. If you have a question, then you can take that question. After that, then we zoom into public goods.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Please, is development gap the same as inequality gap?
Yeah, good question. Development gap is not necessarily inequality gap, but the development gap is often a consequence of inequality gap, or one is a function of the other. Development gap is a function of inequality. When people have inequality gaps widening, then it also leads to widening development gaps more often than not. For instance, you see that areas where we have huge income inequality, where the difference between income earned by the rich and the poor are very huge, those are often areas also associated with low development, because you go there, you see that probably sometimes you see it's only 20% of the people who own the 80% of the income that is generated in the area. So what about the others? So you see, let me just give you this crude example. You can go to a village that development is very, very, very low, but you see somebody with a very nice, posh, Accra kind of house in there. And when you see that kind of situation, you see that development gap is going to widen, because again, the gap between the rich and the poor is very wide, and therefore, when you are able to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor in terms of income distribution, then development also comes up. Because if you are able to bridge that gap between, you are able to help the poor to also get some income and be able to accumulate income and get opportunities, then the poor can also decide to also build what, at least some moderate housing structure. So gradually you see that the landscape changes. It's changing because the income situation, the income distribution, the income inequality gap is closing up. So that is the extent to which I can answer your question also. Any other question? So one way of also trying to reduce development gap is to also focus on reducing income inequality. If you are able to do that, you see that you gradually reduce development gap as well. And vice versa. Sometimes reducing development gap also improves income inequality. Income equality improves income equality. For instance, if there's a village where now, you decide that we are going to construct a very good road there, and this creates opportunities for them. And once the development gap closes and opportunities are created for the people to earn income, they are able to take advantage of this income, any opportunities that come in with this development projects. In the end, you see that income inequality also reduce. So I think it's a bi-causality kind of thing. It feeds to each other. All right, any other question? Yes, no, yes. Any other question? Yeah, no, yes. Any other question? Yeah, no, yes. Or you want Sako there to sing it before you ask your question? Yes, Ashley, ask your question.
We don't have any question.
Oh, and then why do you unmute your microphone? I want people who can ask questions now. And you are unable to ask questions when we come to class, and I give you this opportunity because you don't read before coming to class. True or false?
True.
True or false?
True.
I mean, thank you for being honest. So at least please try and read the summary the textbook I've sent to you before next week. Okay, what are we looking at? Next week, we are looking at externalities on the cost outline. Okay, let me go and check the textbooks and on the being good, I try to even know the chapters on the course outline for some of those things for you. So, okay, which chapter? Chapter 4 or chapter 3? Okay, let me go there. If I can't read all at all, let me just read maybe the introduction and then the conclusion or the summary notes that they are provided there. Then you have a general idea or you have some idea before coming to class. For instance, you see this slide. The first one I introduced today. All these points here, I pick it from the summary of the chapter on market failure from Stiglitz. And then that is what I used to introduce the subject of market failure to. It gives you the best eye view of what the topic entails before even you go into the nitty-gritty. So when we look at this, the next thing is that I just start picking the issues from this general overview one by one. So now we are talking about competition, we talk about externality, we talk about imperfect market, we talk about information asymmetry and all that. All those things come from point 3. Do you see that? So it gives you idea, you have a best idea of it, it makes you better student. So try and then make sure that you go through at least the summary before you come to class to give you a better idea and for you to be able to ask questions. Am I proceeding?
Yes, sir.
Victoria, what's your question?
So I was saying with the Stiglitz book, it's difficult to find the summaries, and they are in parts, not chapters.
Stiglitz?
Yes.
No. Also, I'm not sure. Because I use it, I also use the same soft copy. Okay. Just let's demonstrate that what Victoria is saying is not true. Can you see what I'm trying to show?
Yes, sir.
You can see it. Very good. Victoria, look at this. And do you see this? Review and practice. Review and practice.
Yes, sir.
Review and practice. Page 90. 1. Under certain conditions, market competitive results in Pareto efficient. Are these not the same thing I'm showing you?
Yes. It's 60.
Huh?
I think the page right, rather.
You said?
I said I didn't get the page right.
Oh, okay. It's around page 90 or so, right?
Yeah.
Here you are. For this book, you see that after every chapter, they'll tell you review and practice. Then they'll say summary. Have you? You haven't gone through the book. That is the problem. After every chapter, you see this small heading, review and practice. So go there. If you are supposed to read chapter 4 and you are unable to read the whole of the chapter, just go to the end of chapter 4. Then you see review and practice. you go through the major points there. They'll list them 1, 2, 3, 4. You see that they have even numbered them here. This is what I can do. The paternalism I was talking about is here. The merit goods that the government compel individuals to consume, like seat belts and elementary education, merit goods. They are all here. So another way of trying to read the book, if you don't read everything, is to just focus on those aspects that they have highlighted, they are bolding. You see this play, they bold merit goods. Here they bold paternalism. So you can just go and, okay, what 2 sentences, you can read 1 or 2 sentences around where they bold paternalism, 2 sentences before and after. You get the idea about paternalism already from there. You don't have to read all these paragraphs. It is only when sometimes you read, oh, okay, this looks nice, interesting. Let me see the example. Then you go, oh, okay, one might argue that smoking causes cancer. And that's since individuals who get cancer may be treated in public hospital or financed by public funds, smoking impose a cost on non-smokers. This is, however, can be dealt with by making smokers to pay full cost, blah, 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 blah. So you see, they start giving you example and explanation. This is easy to follow. Easy to follow. Easy to follow. So all the things we have discussed there, they are here. The examples are cited here. This was the diagram I showed you the last time when we were talking about consumer surplus, producer surplus. I pick it right from here. So, my people, let's work hard. It's working hard. You are students. You don't have much on your head. And our time, we don't even have the soft copy. You have to go and look for the hard copy from the BAM library in University of Ghana. Sometime before you get there, somebody has picked it and go and hide it somewhere. So you have to be checking. You see? So please do well. This is another one. The chapter before, chapter 4, market efficiency, review and practice. So they give you the key points all here. The key points are all here. If you read this even before you join the lecture, you see that you have some idea already about what we are going to discuss, and it makes you good students. A word to the wise is always enough. Now let me come back to my presentation, and then what is the time? Okay, we can still learn. Yeah, any other question? Are you able to see the slides on public goods?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now we have to discuss this. Because of time, I don't know whether we can tackle all the issues here, but there are some calculations that we use to demonstrate our understanding of the theoretical issues that we do here. So if we are able, we can do that today. But if we are not able because of time, then we will do that next week, and then we take externalities. Maybe I think externalities should not be very long, so we can still patch up along the way. All right, so fasten your seatbelts. What are public goods? Public goods are more or less goods that will either not be supplied by the market, or sometimes they are supplied in insufficient quantities. That this is the kind of definition that you can tell a layman on the street and a person, and okay, if the good cannot be supplied, or will be supplied in insufficient quantity, this is a public good. But this is not a standard definition. It's not a university definition of public goods. And that is what, excuse me to cite this example again, those of you who took monetary economics last semester did. Usually, when you want to provide a definition for exam purposes, try and provide a standard definition, because our marking schemes always dwell on standard definitions. Because you have to take the marking scheme. Sometimes the regulators of university education, GTech, sometimes comes from those marking schemes and etc. and go and study and see to what extent standards be improved or worsening in the system. So we oftentimes dwell on those standard definitions. So learn standard definitions. When you want to provide a definition in an exam situation, try as much as possible to provide a standard definition. It is only when you are hard up and it is practically impossible for you to provide the standard definition that you dwell on your layman understanding of what it is. For instance, those of you who took monetary economics last semester, there was a question I discussed with you during our tutorial, and I told you if you want to write for this question, for instance, in the introduction, you must define money. And the definition of money I wanted in the introduction is standard definition of money. So those of you who went to those other textbooks that are lazily providing you just the bare definitions, you don't earn the mark. For instance, we say money is anything that is generally accepted for 1, a medium of exchange; 2, a standard for different payment; 3, a unit of account; 4, a store of value. So these 4 functions are the functions we use to define money. We say money is what money does. Money, called the functions of money is what money is. So we want you to be able to get these 4 definitions into your these 4 functions into your definition. So the marking scheme provides that for each definition, for each function that you mention in the definition, you earn 1 mark. So if you fall on those substandard definitions, say money is anything generally that is used for payment of goods and services or as a medium of exchange, you get 1 mark out of the 4 for the introduction. Somebody who says, oh, money is that which is used for making payment for goods and services and serving as a unit of account, gets 2, because you have mentioned only 2 functions. So again, you see that we are looking at the standard definition. So try as much as possible. Sometimes I understand that you are in an exam room, you might not have studied that so much, but under the circumstance, that is the only question you feel you can answer in that moment, and you don't have standard definition. Fine, you can. But if you have to do that, if you have to provide standard, you have to write any definition at all. First, focus on the standard definition. Only do the layman kind of definition when you are unable to provide a standard. Just by way of advice. So later on, I'll define what I mean by public goods for you, but this is just a layman view of it, that if you cannot, the good is such that it cannot be supplied by private market or it is supplied in insufficient quantities, then we say it's a public good. So all goods provided by the private sector or the private market share one important characteristic. It must be excludable. Exclusion must be possible. Why? Because if I can exclude you from consuming that private good, then you will be forced to make some payment for it. And it is making the payment for it that will encourage the private entrepreneur to produce that. Why? Because if no payment is made, the private entrepreneur will not be able to determine whether he or she will make profit. You know, private entrepreneurs are driven by profit. So you must be able to exclude somebody. So private goods have the quality or property of excludability. So the excludability makes you or one, forces one to pay for it. And that payment is what is the condition for, more often than not, the private market to produce that. But not all goods share this characteristic. there are some goods we call public goods that once they are provided, it is impossible to charge anybody to pay anything for it. And sometimes even charging them become undesirable. And the private goods usually, private market or private sector usually shy away from producing this type of these goods we call public goods. And if they will produce it at all, they will produce too little of them based on only what people are willing to pay for. And last time when I was discussing Adam Smith's understanding of this kind of goods, I told you that if you are a private entrepreneur or a business entity and you identify this kind of good that people will not be willing to pay for it, you can't charge them for it, then the best way is to sell the ideas to a government and then see if you can buy into it. And once they buy into it, they pay on behalf of the consumers and then they tax them indirectly so they can raise the monies. I told you last time. All right, so some goods exhibit a property that they simultaneously provide benefits to more than one individual at the same time. The examples are the defense, law enforcement, radio, television broadcast, then street lights, flood control, clean air, etc. And these goods are such that they are jointly consumed. And once they are jointly consumed, we say they are non-rivalry in consumption. They are non-rivalry in consumption. Being non-rivalry in consumption means that the consumption of one individual does not reduce the quantities or the benefits available to other individuals. That's to say that the marginal cost for an additional individual enjoying the good is zero. So if I want to enjoy such a good, the extra cost that I will incur in enjoying that public good is zero. And if the extra cost I will incur is zero, how much will I be willing to pay for it? Zero. Because usually it is the marginal cost that determines how much I'm willing to pay for it. So in this case, you see that because the marginal cost of any additional consumer is zero, it costs nothing for extra consumers to consume the good. And if it costs nothing for the extra consumers to consume the good, you can't exclude them. You cannot exclude them. And this kind of situation we call non-rivalryness in consumption. Non-rivalry in consumption. It means the consumption of one individual will not reduce the quantities available to another individual. They can jointly consume the good without any reduction in the benefits that accrues to each of them. Then the second one is that it doesn't make sense, therefore, to exclude even when the good is non-rivalry. Why? Because you see, the marginal cost of added consumer is zero. So it means that charging for non-rivalry goods is inefficient. If the additional cost is zero, why do you have to exclude them, or how do you have to exclude them, or why do you have to try to exclude them? It will only lead to what? Under consumption, which is not optimal as far as the society is concerned. It is not socially optimal. So in this case, you see that if you have a good that has these non-rivalry characteristics, it is likely to be a public good. The second characteristic that is important as far as public goods are concerned is what we call non-excludability. That's the use of a public good may be non-excludable. That is to say that it will be difficult, or it will be impossible, or at least very costly to exclude any particular individual from consuming it once that public good is provided. That is what we mean by excludability. So, for instance, you take street lights. Once the street light is provided in your area, anybody can enjoy it. When I'm going to buy item by the roadside, I walk under it. If you are also passing by, you walk under it. My consumption doesn't affect your consumption, so it's non-bribery. You cannot exclude me. You cannot say, oh, you can't pass here because there is a street light here. You cannot exclude me from consuming that as well. So you see, because of these two characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalry or non-rivalryness in consumption, we define goods that have these characteristics as public goods. So how do we define public goods formally? Then we say these are goods that are non-excludable and non-rivalry in consumption. They are non-excludable and non-rivalry in consumption. So that's our formal definition. They are goods or services that are non-rivalry and non-excludable in consumption. So you have it. But to say further that if these two characteristics, the non-rivalryness and the non-excludability, apply to a good, then we say it's a pure public good. But if one of them apply, but the other one doesn't apply, then we say it's impure public good. So some goods may have non-rivalryness, but are excludable. Some may have the excludability, but are non-rivalry. So you see, you can have these situations we refer to as pure and impure public goods. Let me move ahead and quickly talk about this matrix, which gives us ideas about what I've just said. On the top, horizontal, you have exclusion and say non-excludability. Then at the vertical, you have non-rivalryness and then rivalryness. A good which shares the characteristics of rivalryness and exclusion is called a private good. Example, cars, any good that is private, you can mention a lot of them. They are there plenty. And cars, for instance, you can exclude people from using it, right? If the car belongs to me, I can say you don't have to sit in it. You are excluded. And also rivalry, because when you sit in the car, your consumption of it can reduce the benefit I gain from it. So it is also rivalry in consumption. For instance, if you sit in the car and it's not your own and you have not been granted property right or access, you see that maybe assume that the car has air condition, you will also be participating in the air condition. The heat you emit will reduce the level of coolness that the owner of the car may enjoy. So this kind of goods have the rivalryness and excludability condition. So it's a pure private good or say private good. Then we have some that are rivalry in nature but non-excludable. These are impure public goods. For instance, commons, and this kind of impure public goods where they are rivalry, they have the rivalryness and non-excludability condition or characteristics are referred to as commons. Sometimes some textbooks say tragedy of commons. Example is fishing ground. Let's take the sea. The sea, you can't exclude anybody from going onto the sea to fish. But the more people that enter that sea shore or segment to fish, the lesser you enjoy it because they are all going to compete for the fishes in there. So if Kofi is able to catch wild fish, it means that fish is not available to me to catch. So it means that Kofi's consumption, as far as the use of the sea is concerned, will affect my consumption. This is rivalry. This is a rivalry in consumption. So that's why sometimes you see people argue over some aspect of the sea. Oh, I am fishing here, you can't go here. I don't know, but sometimes they say when they form their own groups, they do that. But generally for fishing grounds, the more people go in there to fish, the less fish each of them will be able to catch. And therefore that becomes the fact that it becomes rivalry in consumption. But to go onto the sea to go and fish is non-excludable. Anybody at all can go there. Then for another example, UPXA car park. Whenever you come, I assume I'm not talking about those that are reserved for faculty, and even those that are reserved for faculty. Once you come in there as a faculty, you can park in anywhere in the faculty car park. So it's what? Non-excludable. But if you come in there and cars are parked in all the slots already, you can't park in any other place there again. So it becomes what? Rivalry in consumption. So going in there, nobody can exclude you, but to be able to get a place to park when all the slots are occupied, it becomes what? Rivalry in consumption. Then there are others also that share the characteristics that they are excludable but non-rivalry. Example, club goods. Let's say concert party. Those of you go to Silverbird to go and watch movies, you realize that when you get in there, before you get in there, you have to buy a ticket. So through the medium of the ticket, you have to make some payment. So through the payment, you are excluding people from getting access to the Silverbird to watch a movie. But once you get in there with your ticket, the consumption of a movie that is screening is non-rivalry, because when I sit there, anybody who sits by me or in front of me can also enjoy the same without reducing. Sitting by me or additional people coming into the room does not usually reduce the consumption available to the people who are in the room, because they have access to the same screen, and therefore it's non-rivalry in consumption. Then what we are driving at is the pure public goods, where we have the non-rivalryness and non-excludability applying. Example, street lights, police, defense, free community radio service. And let me take the example of the free community radio service. If you go to a community where they have a free community radio service, even here in Accra, where we have a lot of FM stations, for instance, and once you have a radio set, nobody can stop you from listening to a particular FM station. So it's non-excludable. Then if you tune to a particular station, say City FM, it doesn't, and somebody else, your neighbor tunes to City FM. The consumption of you tuning to City FM does not reduce the consumption available to your neighbor who is also tuned to City FM. So it's non-rivalry in consumption. So if you have this kind of good, police, defense, street lights, these are pure public good. They are pure public good because they share the non-excludability criteria or characteristic, and then they also share the non-rivalry characteristic. Now, let me tell you what excludability and rivalryness mean as far as our economic analysis is concerned. When we say it is excludable for private goods means that you cannot enjoy the good without paying for it. So anybody who is not willing to pay the going price for the good cannot consume it. and the good is often only rushing to people who are willing to pay for it or who are willing to value it the most for Pareto efficiency to be achieved. What about the reverse? Non-excludability means you cannot exclude me. If you can't exclude me, then there is no incentive to pay for it. And that also means that sellers will not be willing to exact users' price for it. So, okay, since I can consume it, you cannot exclude me from consuming the good, I can decide not to pay. And non-payment then means that the private sector or the private market were unable to produce such goods that have the characteristics of non-excludability because you cannot exact a price from them for such goods. Some people will say, okay, why don't you convince them to pay something voluntarily? And that question means that voluntary pricing cannot also be enforced. Why can it be enforced? Because, again, because you cannot exclude them. So if you say pay some of them, except those that are where that will decide to pay on moral grounds, you cannot force them to pay. And due to the excludability and the failure, but for governments can coerce people to pay through taxes or indirect taxes. So once they charge you indirect taxes, you can pay for those items. For instance, if you look at, if you pay water bill, sometimes you see we have 1% of whatever you consume going to fire service. Fire service or fighting fire is a public good, but people will not be willing to pay for it. So what happens next? The government has taken it over, is coercing you. So through the water bill system, you are paying for firefighting. The same applies to street lights. Sometimes when you take your bills, you see a percentage or some payment is exacted for street lights. That's also another coercive way of making you pay. So unless you can coerce the people, you can force the people to pay, this good non-excludability will mean that they will not pay anything for it. The failure of a voluntary system to enforce non-excludability is what we refer to as free rider problem, or in other words, the reluctance of individuals to contribute voluntarily to provision of a public good is what we refer to as free rider problem. Free rider means they can consume it without voluntarily paying for it. They can consume it without paying for it. So they are free riding. And free rider problem results usually from the non-excludability of a public good. Then note that although all individuals consume the same quantity of a public good, they have different marginal benefits from it. And therefore, if the market has to be efficient, then it is necessary that they are able to determine what value each of these individuals are willing to pay for those public goods. For instance, if it comes to street light, the value of a street light or the value that an armed robber or a thief will place on a street light provision is different from the value that a security conscious person will place on the provision of a street light, or even a security guard or a town crier or the people who use the street light more and more will place on it. So in this case, market efficiency condition would have required that one price is charged all these people. But because they have different benefits of this good, they have different levels of benefit that they derive from provision of public good, it means that they will have to charge different prices. They will have to review their preference, their willingness to pay different prices. So you have to aggregate all these before you can determine whether how many street lights can be provided. But in a perfect competitive market, we only know of one price that must prevail in the market because nobody can influence price. So once the market forces determine that this is the equivalent price, then that is the going price, the clearing price in the market. So in that case, you see that because different prices have to be exacted from different consumers for public good, the market will again fail in that respect, or the market outcome become inefficient. Now, what about the rivalriness in consumption? For rivalriness in consumption of a private good, and with a private good, because it is rivalry, the marginal cost of allowing one more person to consume the same good is not zero. So consumers that are consuming already would like to enforce it. The reason being that they know if you join them, because the marginal cost of extra user consuming is not zero. When you join them, it means you are going to reduce the satisfaction or the benefit they gain from consuming those items. So in this case, what will happen is that they will be willing to exclude you. They will be willing to enforce that you don't join them. And this is how the market works for a private good. So any additional consumer of a private good by one or more person come entirely at the expense of a foregone consumption by somebody else. So because of this condition, you see the private market works Pareto efficiently, because you cannot let somebody else, one more person, consume without reducing the consumption available to the others. So you see in the private market, the rivalriness is necessary to achieve people, to achieve payment, to make sure you can exclude people so that they pay. But the non-rivalriness means that the marginal cost of allowing one extra individual to consume is zero. If it is zero, that means that that individual will be willing to pay zero price, and which private entrepreneur will be willing to produce a good for which the consumers are willing to pay the price being zero, unless the government is teaming up with that individual. And if it's teaming up with that individual, probably the government will be paying for the consumers indirectly. Again, the marginal cost of supplying to additional user is zero. This means zero price should be charged for additional users or additional consumption, and hence this will be inefficient to exclude other people. It will be inefficient to exclude other people because it will lead to under-consumption of such goods, because once it is provided, the marginal cost of any extra user joining up is zero. So it means that the good is virtually free, and therefore excluding others will lead to underconsumption or underutilization of the good ones provided. And this is not socially optimal or socially efficient. So we'll demonstrate this with a numerical example later when we come to our calculations segment. So let's emphasize again that when we talk about public good, we mean a good or a commodity or a service that exhibits the characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalriness in consumption. A pure public good exhibits both characteristics, whereas an impure public good exhibits one of the characteristics with varying degrees of the other. So sometimes you can have one characteristic very concrete, but with some varying degrees of the other, or the absence of the other altogether sometimes. So the question is, in the case of non-rivalry goods, exclusion is undesirable. Exclusion is undesirable. Why? Because the marginal cost of extra consumer joining up is zero. And so it is usually under-consumed if you exclude them, And if you don't exclude them, it is more often than not under supply. So you are in a dilemma. Sometimes they call it the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma. So this prisoner's dilemma also makes it difficult for a market to operate efficiently. Now the question is, will government intervention resolve public goods situation? Yes. Why? Because government has the coercive power. Once you give your political sovereignty, your vote to a government, it has the coercive power to charge you taxes. So government, for instance, can provide a public good. Why? Because it can indirectly pay for it through taxing the people and making the money available to maybe even a private entrepreneur to be able to provide it. Sometimes that works. And sometimes too, there are public agencies that directly provide these public goods. In that case, there is no need for payment for them. You just have to buy the materials and then they go and produce or provide these public goods, and then the monthly payment to them is their compensation as public officers or public workers. Then again, but we must note that there is one condition which makes the market fail when it comes to public good. That is, each individual has different valuations of a public good that is provided. Each individual has different benefits, different valuation or different measure of benefits from a public good once provided. And therefore, that means that they will be willing to pay different prices. And if they are willing to pay different prices, then for a private entrepreneur to produce, the private entrepreneur must be able to aggregate these prices and see how much will accrue, and on the basis of that, how many can be produced efficiently. And the revelation of preference also can make the government fail in this case. Why? Because if the people cannot tell you this is our true measure of importance of this public good, then if you want to tax them directly to support the provision of the public good, it will be difficult. So sometimes these situations, the inability of potential consumers or consumers to review their true preference for the goods also lead to market failures. And even government failures too. So last but one bullet, we can also classify public goods according to geographical location or geographical reach. So we also often talk about local public goods that are in your immediate vicinity. We talk about regional. Those are in the regional spectrum or with the distance extended to a little bit further. Then we have the national ones. The national ones, example of the national ones, we can talk about the police is one of the national ones. The local one, we can talk about street lights and etc. So sometimes they classify them according to geographical reach. A number of questions to serve the basis for, a number of questions should provoke your thoughts based on all that I've said so far. The first one is that, do you consider a motorway as a public good? Why? And what kind of public good is this? These questions, try to answer them yourself later. Will private individual provide a motorway? Under what circumstances will they provide it? Will a public-private partnership enhance provision of a public good? How? Provoke your talk on some of these questions. So that's for your mentors. Maybe let me pause let me see my time first. Oh, we don't have time. Okay. I want to proceed to handle some basics. The first basic I want to handle is this one. Before I come to the, where am I? Yeah. Now, we have a private good, I should say, private good and market demand. Private good and market demand. Oftentimes, we try to find out how aggregation is done for private versus public goods. Remember that I don't know the extent to which these things were introduced to you in level 200, but in elements of economics, there is something we call market demand. And market demand refers to the demand of all the buyers in the market. So if you have 10 buyers, then we add the demand of all these 10 buyers at various prices to determine the market demand. So let's try that. Assume that we have two individuals that are in the market as buyers, individual A and individual B. And individual A market demand is this demand curve I label here. Individual B is this one. Individual demand is this B. And this is the demand for the market or market demand. So this diagram that we have here, what you see is that we have two prices, price 4 and price 5 cedis. The quantities consumed are 1 and 1.5. And then here we have 2 and 3. So if you want to find the market demand, which will give you some idea of the marginal rate of technical substitution that will be needed to produce that, you take the price for, at the price for individual A's, at the price for individual A's consumption is 1.5. At the price for individual B's consumption is what? 3. So at the price for the market demand is going to be 1.5 plus 3, 4.5. So that's the total market demand. Individual A demands 1.5 at price 4. Individual B demands 3 at 4, price 4. And that gives you 1.5 plus 3 gives you 4.5. At price 5, you know when price goes up, quantity falls, right? So at price 5, what happens? Individual A demands 1, individual B demands 2, and the market demand at price 5 will be 1 plus 2, which is 3. So for a private good, if you want to know the market demand or the total demand, you do what we call horizontal summation of units demanded. Horizontal summation of unit demanded. So that is what I have done here. Do you have any question on that before I proceed? And usually the supply curve the supply curve that we put here is akin to the marginal rate of technical substitution or marginal rate of transformation when these goods have to be produced and supplied to the market. Now, I want us to look at the situation of a public good. What it is like for a public good. Now, for a public good, usually what happens is that the same quantity is available to all others to consume. So, but each person has different valuations or different measure of importance that the public good can be. So, for instance, let's say individual A says that for me, my valuation of it is that when the public good is provided, let's say n public good is provided, or n number of street light, 50 street light, my payment, my valuation or my preference for it, or my willingness to pay for that, because I am maybe less security conscious person, I'm going to pay price of 2 cedis for that. Then we have individual B who says that if that same n units are produced, I am willing to pay a price of, let's say, 5 cedis. Individual B may be much more security conscious than individual A. And let's say we have a number of individual, thousands of individuals. But let's simplify that. Okay, there are 2 individuals here. We want to find the total demand. So we draw the total demand now. The same number of units will be produced. Now, individual A is willing to pay 2 cedis. Individual B is willing to pay 5 cedis. And if you aggregate that, what they are willing to pay, you get 7. 2 plus 5, 7. So if the good will be produced, then it means that the price elicited must be 7. Let me do this again. So the price elicited for that must be 7. So this gives you the total that they are willing to pay for it. So whereas for private good, we do horizontal summation, for public goods, we do vertical summation. Public goods to get the market demand, do vertical summation. Vertical summation. So for the analysis here we have done, let me see if I can show the slide. Good. The price 2 here is more or less the marginal rate of substitution or the payment that individual A is willing to make for the provision of the public good. The price this is also similar for individual B. And therefore, if we have to produce this public good, for instance, then the production should happen at a point where the total price exacted for it is 7, and we have our supply curve. And this supply curve is often also the same as the marginal rate of technical substitution also. Yeah. So this is what gives you the summation as far as the public good is concerned. Why are we doing all that? It's because we are coming to solve a question like this, where it says that a certain community is looking to 80 street lights being provided, and some security-loving individuals are willing to pay P1, P2, P3, P4, P5. So we are asked if the private entrepreneur want to provide a street light now, how many will he provide? You have to add the prices all and equate to the marginal cost of what? Production. The prices, if you add all these, that gives you the marginal benefit. So as you can see here, the addition of this and this gives you the marginal benefit of these two individuals from provision of street light is 7. That's the marginal benefit. So now you liken that to the marginal cost, and the question says the marginal cost of producing street light is 1,700. So when you add P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, and whatever you get, you equate to 1,700, and that gives you the answer then. Why would a private entrepreneur be willing to provide only the number in I? Why? Because that is the one to which, the number to which there are some people willing to pay. So people have reviewed their true importance or true valuation or true preference for this street light by saying they will pay these prices. So once they are willing to pay, the private entrepreneur will produce that. I briefly explain 2 limitations to provision of the number of street light by the private entrepreneur. 2 limitations. You see that the first one is that if the people are not willing to review that, they will pay P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, it will not be provided. So through revelation of preference for the street light is one of the limitations. The second one is that the issue of underproduction. If you solve this, at the end of the day, you see that of the 80 street light needed, it's only 50 that is produced. So that will also be another point. Why will it be inefficient to exclude those who did not pay from consuming the good? Because this is a public good. So once it is provided, the marginal cost of providing the good, the marginal cost of extra consumer joining in the consumption of the street light is zero. So if it's zero, it means you cannot exact any price from them, and therefore you cannot exclude them either, because the good ones provided is non-excludable. And it is sometimes it is even, you can also say it is it will be extremely difficult or costly to exclude anybody from consuming it. Explain why the people of this community will be justified if they petition the government to provide a 80 street light. They will be justified because government has the coercive power to directly or indirectly use tax revenue to provide that. So the people are paying, but they are paying indirectly in terms of the taxes. Discuss one problem government could face if it wants to efficiently provide the 50 street light or the 80 street light, I should write, the 80 street lights. One problem government could face is that if the people know they will be taxed for consuming the street light after provision, they will reduce the valuation of it. They won't tell you the true value. They won't tell you, oh, I can pay 2 cedis, I can pay 5 cedis. Oh, okay, I can pay 50 pesos. This one will, oh, instead of the 5 cedis, the person review on, I'll pay 1 cedi. So that's a problem that the government can face. Stage 3, government failure issues. Of course, I know what I'm doing just to make sure that you are able to connect what we. Somebody said my screen is not showing. Is it the case that it's not showing? Or it's just
It's showing.
is any other person able to see the screen that I was showing earlier?
Yeah, it's showing. It's showing.
Okay, then it means the person might have some connection problems. Now let me come to the theory of what I've demonstrated to you in terms of those numerical examples. Efficiency in the provision of public goods require that the marginal rate of substitution for a public good versus a private good must be the same for all individuals that consume the public good. So it must be the same for exchange efficiency. But in this case, because they have different valuations of the street, valuations for the street are different importance is attached to the street right provision, they are willing to pay. This individual A has marginal rate of substitution A, which reveals what he's willing to pay for the street light. Individual B has this marginal rate of substitution, which reveals the amount he's willing to pay for the public good relative to a private good or anything else, etc., until we get to the last member of the population who also reveals this as his amount is willing to pay. So the efficient provision of this requires that you sum all the marginal rates of marginal rates of substitution and equate to what we call marginal rate of transformation, which is essentially the same as marginal cost of producing the good G. So whereas efficiency in the provision of a private good requires simply that this must be equal to this, must be equal to this, must be equal to price. I didn't bring in the price here. So if it's a private good, it must be equal to price because the price is taken in the market. So let me just add this at once. Yeah. So this must be equal to the price here for private market. But for efficient provision of a public good, you sum all the marginal rate of substitutions and you equate to the marginal cost. So that was what I was doing here. You sum P1, P2, P3, P4, P5 and equate to the marginal cost of $1,700. Now, simply put, the efficiency in the provision of a public good requires that the summation of marginal benefits or marginal valuations equal the marginal cost. The summation represents the total amount that all individuals together are willing to pay for an extra unit of the public good. This represents the collective demand curve. The price represents how much of the other goods have to be forgone to produce one extra unit of a public good. This is the marginal cost, or what we call the marginal rate of transformation. So when demand is equal to supply, then we say that the total marginal rate of substitution, in other words, the addition, the summation of all the prices that the people are willing to pay in line with their measure of importance of the public good, must be equal to the marginal rate of transformation, must be equal to the marginal cost to produce Pareto efficient output for a public good. So for a Pareto efficient level of public good to be produced, you must sum all these various marginal rate of substitutions and etc., and then equate to marginal cost. Summing these various marginal rates of substitutions is just like summing the price, because the marginal rate of substitution of A will be reflected in the price that is willing to pay for the straight line. The same applies to B, the same applies. So when you sum all this, you equate to the marginal cost, then you get the efficient provision condition. Deduction. If people have not reviewed their true preference or true benefits from using the public good, there will be problems in ensuring efficiency. Let's say individual A, instead of maybe willingness to pay 2 cedis as a valuation of a provision of public good, is decided to say, oh, I'll pay 50 pesos. That is not revealing his true valuation for the straight line. Let's say individual B, instead of paying, let's say, willing to pay 5 cedis, decide, oh, yeah, I'll pay 1 cedi. He's not revealing his true valuation. If he's not revealing his true valuation, at the end of the day, you see that less and less of the public good will produce because the individuals are not revealing their true valuation. It is the true valuation that usually becomes a motivation for even a private entrepreneur to produce. Note, provision here denote the choice and payment processes rather than products or service produced by the government or private firms. Thus, a public good can be provided by government but produced by a private firm. So when we say provision, the one providing public good, we mean the one paying for it. When we say producing public good, we mean the firm producing it. During Nkrumah era, public goods were produced by a state agency called Public Works Department, PWD. So in that case, we say a public good is being provided and produced by government. But in recent times, because of this IMF World Bank theoretic framework of privatization and the fact that they deem private market to be more efficient in production of such goods than the public sector when it comes to agency problem, what is the principal agency problems and etc. It is no longer always the case that government himself provides the public goods. Government himself produces the public goods. Let me choose my words carefully. It is not always the case that the government himself produces the public goods. Government provides and the private sector can produce. That is what is happening in Ghana. Anytime government decides to, for instance, the street light I was telling you about last time, government decision that we want to provide street light. Then it is put to procurement process. Some people bid for it, or they do their so-called fictitious sourcing of contractors. And when they do so sourcing, normally it goes to either party activists or party financier. That is what happens. And then once the contract is awarded, the private firm or the private entity is going to produce the street lights, but it is the government that is going to pay for it, and we say government provides. So government provides a public good that is produced by a private firm. Take note of that. What then determines whether a private firm or a public corporation should produce a public good for government? It depends on relative wage and material cost, administrative cost, diversity of taste, and distributional issues. And this issue, for instance, if the wage associated with the public sector or public corporation producing is much more than that of a private one, then it will be ideal for the private sector to provide it and produce it, or to produce it. So these are some of the issues that check diagrams and illustrate on private good and public good. Yeah, that's what I've done here. Private good here, public good one here. So we concluding solutions to public goods as far as market failure is concerned. We say non-excludability and non-rivalry properties will lead to no price being paid by users, and therefore users are free to ride. The free rider problem comes in there. What is the solution to free rider problem? Government action. Government can tax them because taxes are coercive, and they pay for the taxes, and the taxes are rerouted into payment of for the public good. Transform the public good into private good. Transform the public good into private good through metering or road tolls. That's another. When you transform it into private good through metering, then people are forced to make payment for it. For instance, when you use the motorway and you are supposed to pay a toll, you see that and that payment of toll will go directly into provision of what public good like roads and etc. somewhere else. So you can transform the public good into private good through metering. Metering as well. When it is free for anybody to use, now with meters, you can exclude others. They have to buy units and put into the meters, or the meters will be calibrated in such a way that they can consume only up to a certain stage, and beyond that, they have to pay for it and all that. So now payment can be extracted. So these are some of the ways by which we can address then government provision of public good for equity reasons. So government provision here where government initiates the action and maybe publishes a call for bids. And then after that, they go through the public procurement process. A contractor is awarded a contract. Then the contractor have to mobilize by sometimes going to the bank and telling the bank that I'm getting a contract from government, so please give me this amount of money as mobilization. They'll pay me immediately I finish, and then I'll come and pay you, or I'll pay this and that. So why will government do that? Government will do that for equity reasons. Equity means fairness in distribution of what? Opportunities or income. So through the taxing system and through the provision, government can bring about some equity then to bridge the gap between the poor and the rich, more or less. Review questions for mental gymnastics. Can clean air, education, good roads, income distribution, information, GBC broadcast be considered as public goods? How to answer this is simply to find out, do these goods share the characteristics of non-excludability and non-rivalriness in consumption? You have to technically look at it and see if they satisfy that, then you can say this or that is a public good. To what extent has technological advances reduced the problem of non-excludability? Yes. Technological advances have come in at this time to reduce the problem of non-excludability much more, because now, for instance, with TV sets, some of them you have to pay some subscription before you are able to watch them. So it reduces the non-excludability. Now people can be excluded if you don't pay the license, the permit, or what is it? If you don't pay the subscription, you don't enjoy it. So the technological advancement on and on will be reducing pure public goods into more and more impure public goods. Example is the metering. So they can meter the public good, and then it becomes less and less non-excludable. Under what circumstances will private firms provide an efficient level of a public good? They have to sum all the marginal rates of substitution, or they have to sum all the amounts that people are willing to pay and equate to the marginal cost of producing the street light or the public good. All right, thank you. Our time is almost up. We have 2 minutes more. This question, I'll solve it next week for you. And then we move on to look at the externalities tuition. And you know, I told you in your final exam, you have one compulsory question that will be calculation. Question 2 will be a calculation question. And this is a candidate. There are other 3 that we will also look at. 2 of them next week, which are associated with externalities. And then one other, which is associated with the impact of fiscal policy on the economy as a whole. So I'll pick one out of the 4, and they are not that difficult if only you are able to understand all that we are talking about. Quite easy, straightforward. All right. Questions? And if you have questions, please do ask at this juncture. The slides note I'll send to you later today or early tomorrow morning. And the recording of some of the lectures. The reason is I don't use the UPSC Zoom link, which is a Wacron, because I don't use that one. That one will only permit you to save on your device. for the setting that I use is associated with a project that I'm working together with some other researchers uh, from the Duke University and North Carolina, United States of America. So I have the opportunity to save the recording in the clouds, of which I have to go through some procedures to get you the link to download. So I will share the link for the recording so you yourself you can download from the clouds. So I'll share it with the course rep. The course reps have a common platform where I can just post those links there, and then they'll forward it to you on your various platforms, and then you can easily download yourself. So that is how far I can go as far as those who are requesting the recording for the lectures act. Thank you. Any questions?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
With the public goods, since individuals are not willing to give the true valuation of the good they enjoy, how the government know the cumulative price, the aggregate price?
That is why I said government in that case will not be looking at that. For government provision, government will provide and then tax the people indirectly. It is the private entity. If the private entity want to provide, then the private entity is obliged to sum their valuations of the public good and equate to the marginal cost. But for the government provision, government need not know what valuation they place on it. Just let it be provided, and you can tax them indirectly for that. Hope I've answered. Yeah. Any other question? All right. In the absence of any further question, comment, or view that one wishes to express, I want to wish you the best of the day, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Have a good day.
All right, sir. Thank you.